Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Dupuy. I have a PhD in learning disabilities. I do evaluations, a little bit of advocacy, and a little bit of intervention. I'm also an adult with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
Hi, my name is Kim Sharman. I've worked with kids from kindergarten through college. I've been spending my last, 15 years studying dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, and the remediation skills to help kids to overcome them.
Yeah, you're also a psychotherapist without the training as well, but we won't go there.
Because I had a lot of therapy. So.
I know. That's what makes you as effective and fun as you are on some
Right.
levels. Okay, so today we're talking about GAI and full-scale IQ in the really weirdly named test called the WISC. Do you remember what the WISC stands for?
Weschler
Intelligence Scale for Children.
Weschler Intelligence Scale for Children.
Yeah, which is kind of a bizarre order to put it in, but that's what they came up with. And so it's currently on the 5th edition. And we walked through all of the parts of the WISC in another video. But today we want to talk about one thing in particular. And you get all excited when I talk about GAI. Why do you get all excited when I talk about GAI?
I get excited. Well, first of all, the reason why we're mentioning there's a million, I don't know how many different IQ tests there are. The reason why we're talking about the WISC is because that's what the schools use. That's what your kid is going to be evaluated on.
A lot of the time.
What?
A lot of the time. There's
a lot of time
where school psych has another test, but.
Okay. And why is it important? It's important because there's two ways to interpret the numbers when you're given the WISC. And you as a parent need to understand these numbers, because if they're not giving you the correct numbers to use to decide whether you are eligible for help at school, then you will lose your eligibility. So that's why you need the power.
Beautifully said, Kim. It's like you've been listening to me for the past 20 years.
She taught me how to do this with my own kids, so I had to.
All right, so let's start. We're gonna go old school. I'm gonna pull up my little graph here, and we're going to draw a picture of the bell curve. And I hate doing this under pressure because that's when I whack it out, but we'll try and see how I do. Not beautiful, but you get the general idea. Okay, so there's a major score that comes out of the WISC, the one that we use, which is called the full-scale IQ, right?
Right.
And so to give parents an idea, you're going to see two metrics. You're going to see a metric of 100 and a metric of 10, and they're both equivalent, and they both sit at the 50th percentile. I describe this as like measuring to a millimeter because there's more items, it's a more sensitive measure. And this one is like measuring to a centimeter because there's fewer items that they use to get to there. So when you see subtests, like you'll see similarities, it will have a metric of 10 score of like a 9 or a 12 or whatever. And then you will see vocab, which will also be on the metric of 10, and that might be a 12. And then they would have a verbal comprehension score that would be like a 103 because it averages those two out to give you that overall score. Now, that's not an exact quote because I didn't look that up. I'm just doing it in the moment, right? So that gets you that metric in the hundreds that's more sensitive, and this is that metric of 10. So now when they administer the test and they report scores to you, they're going to come in and say that your child has a full-scale IQ, okay? And let's just call it for the moment. Let's say your kid comes in and it says your child has a full scale IQ of 105. Now, Kim, what do we often see when we have kids that have a full scale IQ of 105?
What do we
When
all
we see kids, what do we see in those numbers?
contained in those numbers are some very low scores when it comes to decoding information.
Okay. What do we see on the IQ test in terms of low score? Do you remember?
No.
Okay. Digit span and coding typically are low scores.
Digit span and coding. Okay.
Yeah. So digit span is repeating numbers forward, repeating numbers backwards, sequencing numbers. And then coding is where they have a number and then they have a weird symbol below.
Oh, that's right.
And then down here, they'll have you translate a bunch of numbers based on the coding that they've given you. So both of those scores tend to fall out on kids with language-based learning disabilities like dyslexia. Okay.
Okay.
And so as a parent, when you're looking at the test scores, if digit span and coding are particularly low relative to the other subtest scores, what happens to that full scale IQ?
Ding, ding, ding. It drags it down. That's why you have to look at digit span and coding.
Yes.
Ding,
Spot
ding, ding.
on.
You have to.
You have to. So in Washington State, they're still using what's called a severe discrepancy formula. And what that means is they will come in and they will say that based on your 105 IQ, there's a band of what we consider normal variation.
Mhm.
So I might be great at math and I might hate reading comprehension. I could love science, but I could hate art history or whatever. I'm just making those up randomly.
Sure.
But what the state is looking for is, do you have scores on various subtests that fall outside of that band, right? Okay, now in Washington State, and this varies by state, they use what's called a regressed standard deviation. Does that sound vaguely familiar?
Regression towards the mean. Yes. Regress
Okay,
standard.
good. See, you remember your statistics.
Yep.
So in Washington State, they want you to have a 1.55 regressed standard deviation below that full scale IQ.
Okay.
So far, so good?
Yep.
Okay. Authors of the test have come in and said, wait, we recognize that kids can have weaker working memory and weaker coding skills if they have a language-based learning disability profile. And they created what's called a GAI, a general ability index. And so what they do then is they add up similarities, block design, vocabulary, figure weights, and there's another one that I'm forgetting, visual puzzles.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
As a parent, so are you saying to me,
Oh, I know it. It's not visual puzzles, it's matrix reasoning. Go ahead.
oh, are you saying that these specific tests that you've just mentioned could be considered substitutes for these digit span and the coding that is dragging the IQ down?
No. What they
Okay.
do is they just take the coding and digit span out.
I see.
So we've gone from 7 subtests creating a full scale IQ to 5 subtests creating a general ability index.
Okay.
Now, the challenge is parents don't have the magic table to go look at the average of those 5 scores to then calculate their own GAI.
Mhm. So the GAI is not listed on the report that you received from the school psychologist.
Depends on the school psychologist.
That's interesting.
Yes.
That's
So
scary.
I've recently had this experience. I am working with a family in a school district, and the school psych did not calculate the GAI.
Mm.
And the reason that it was so important is when we recalculate, or when I recalculated her GAI, her IQ shifted pretty dramatically. And let's say she now scored a 116.
Can you explain how huge that is?
Well, and the easiest way to describe that is to actually draw the picture. So here we had our band of normal variation. Now at a 106, our band of normal variation shifts, right? And so now scores that are here, and I'm going to go ahead and erase that full scale IQ. I'll write in the 105 and the 116 again, right? 105, 116. Now scores here that were previously considered okay at that 105 now are discrepant and fall out of the band.
Wow. And that is huge. So what does a parent do when they don't have you? Who is going to calculate the GAI for them?
So the thing that parents are going to have to do is they're going to have to go back in and ask the school psychologist to calculate the GAI. Or they're going to have to ask the evaluator who did the evaluation to calculate the GAI. Now, let's take a minute. I happen to have an Excel spreadsheet, and I can give parents a little window into what that looks like, and I can give them some rough numbers. Okay, so let's take a look here. I'm going to blow this up a little bit because there's a lot on it and it's pretty tiny. So I can come in here and this is the tests here are listed in the order of administration. And by the way, if you ask most clinicians, block design is like the most fun subtest to administer. And Kim, that's the one that you hated the most.
Actually, I'm better at it now. Yes,
you are. And we've talked about that. So let's say that a kid got a 14 on block design. They got a 12 on similarities. They got a 12 on matrix reasoning. They got a 7 on digit span. They got a 6 on coding. They get a 10 on vocabulary. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then they get a 11 on figure weights. Okay.
Yep.
So when I go into my magic scales, which unfortunately I'm not allowed to show you, and I actually look up the index scores on that, I come up with, everybody can bear with me for just a second, a full scale IQ of 102. Okay, now what has happened in this miraculous table of mine is over here, I have it calculate a GAI. It pulls those 5 subtests that I was talking about, and it comes up as a 59. Now, the trick of this is the clinician actually has to go into a different book. It's called the WISC Administration and Scoring Manual Supplement. And they have to go to a particular table. And I'm actually going to tell you the number of the table because that's not secret. And to find the GAI, they are going to look in table C4, and a 59 actually changes the full scale IQ from 102 to 112. So that's a 10-point shift.
I don't think people most parents do not know about this.
No, why would you?
They don't. And again, you parents will not have privy to these tables that Cindy's referring to, but the school psych knows darn well what she's talking about.
Some do, some don't. Understand.
Okay, well then
they're taught one IQ test typically, and skill sets vary dramatically by the program that they're in, but they're made to be authorities in the public school system, and they hate it when I walk in because I know too much.
So there is someone in the school system who could calculate this GAI for the parents.
It would be the school psych. So the parents should go back into the school psych and say, hey, can you look up and see what my child's GAI would be I've heard that there's a GAI equivalence in the, and I'm gonna actually share this page here. I may get shot for it, but it's just the cover of a book, right? And the administration and scoring manual supplement.
Okay.
Okay. And the IQ test literally in the protocol. So we write on a piece of paper, and that piece of paper has tables on it that help us calculate and score things. And I'm actually trying to find my protocol, which may or may not jump out at me at this moment. But they have a protocol, and on the protocol is a set of tables that help you look it all up, and it literally tells you how to total things and walks you through the entire process. Now, you as parents are actually allowed to request a copy of the cover page to look at, like they can give you that page. And when they actually make the test, they put something on the cover that says, hey, you can actually hand parents this cover. But most clinicians feel like that's off limit and they're not allowed to do that. But if they check on the back of it, it actually says that you can hand it out.
So you're saying that after this page you're referring to is the page of tables, not the page of calculations that they used with the tables? Or, I mean, are they allowed to have both?
They should be allowed to. Oh, I'm going to cheat and do it this way. Hang on one second. I'm actually going to show it to you in another format. And this is just going to take me a second. So they're allowed to have a copy of that front page where it shows all the subtest scores.
Okay, can I say something while you're doing your search?
Yes.
Okay, so parents, once again, I know some of you already get it, but this is complicated. It doesn't mean that your kid's IQ just went from 102 to 112. What it means is by taking out the disability that they need help with, which, you know, is shown within the digit span encoding, you are showing a better representation of your child's IQ by doing the calculation for the GAI. Now, again, why that's important, for those who've taken statistics class, that band that Cindy was talking to, I'm assuming, Cindy, you're referring to the standard deviation.
Right.
So each state has
a regressed standard deviation.
The regressed, okay. So each state has a different regressed standard deviation or a different chunk. And anything within that chunk, it doesn't mean they don't care about your kid, that there's some lower scores in that chunk below your IQ, but it means that they expect that variation is expected for your particular IQ. By moving up your IQ to the higher level, you know, taking out the disability piece, then those lower scores are falling outside that standard chunk, and you are now eligible for help, correct?
You have an argument that is easier to make.
Oh.
Because you can demonstrate a severe discrepancy between potential and actual ability.
Yeah.
So, like, there's two hurdles you have to cross to jump to qualify for special education services. The first one is the identification of a disability, right? So, hey, you're dyslexic. But just because you're dyslexic doesn't mean that you qualify for special education services. The bigger hurdle is you have to demonstrate the need for specially designed instruction, which is the harder piece. Because if you have a kid who's incredibly bright, if they are on grade level, the state will say, great, you don't need specially designed instruction because you're on grade level. You're not guaranteed a Cadillac or Ferrari education, you're guaranteed a Ford education. And so you will often find school districts reluctant to provide SDI for kids who don't show, or they won't, how do I want to say this? They will look at a kid who is very bright and say, there's no real underachievement here. So you don't qualify.
You'll be fine. Because you have a high IQ, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But that
Okay.
is, you know.
Now I found these magical tables. So
Okay.
I'm going to pull up. I found the pictures of them that I wanted to find. Okay, so ta-da, yay! It only took me like 3 hours there. But so let's start with, this is the standard cover page that you should have your child's name, should have their raw score, should have their converted scale scores, and should fill it in all the way down here. So the protocol is actually designed in a way to give parents this information. Okay, so that's standard. You as a parent should be able to get a copy of that page. Okay, and it's helpful for a parent to go in and like mark on it to say, hey, you know, we had a 12 here, we had a, you know, an 11 here, we had a 14 here, right? So you actually seeing kind of the variability. And then when we go to, like, I think we said in digit span, we had a 7, and then we see this precipitous drop here, and coding, we had a 6. It's kind of like, hey, that looks kind of funky, right?
Okay, well, you just said something important. So the parents need to look at that. So the working memory and the processing speed are reflected of the digit span and the coding.
Yes.
Score. Okay, that's the part that I didn't get. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's clear that. Now, the second page that they may or may not share with you, but there's no reason they shouldn't, is this, because it doesn't have any core information that would affect your child's ability to perform on the test, right? So I'm not giving away the items for block design. But what I would do as a clinician now is, let's pull up the WISC scores that we threw in, and this table here. And so all I would do is carry over, we said block design was a 14. So I would write in a 14. Similarities, we said, was a 12, right? Matrix reasoning is a 12. So you can see how I just carried it into my Excel spreadsheet to add these up. And
Right.
we said vocab was a 10, and we said figure weights was an 11, which gives us a GAI total of 59. So we would write 59 in here as a clinician. And then we would, this table here then comes here, and it actually tells the clinician exactly, and that's not a beautiful circle, but you get the idea. It tells the clinician exactly where to look it up and find this information.
Okay.
Right?
This is not brain surgery for the, I mean, the brain surgery is them having to go to the table, the psych having to go and look at all the tables. But as far as the parents understanding the numbers, that's pretty
straightforward.
Yeah.
But nobody sits down and says, hey, by the way, there is something called a GAI. And when we look up the GAI, it can dramatically change how we think of your child's ability. Now, there is a critical value. So let's say your GAI was 104, okay? That the difference between the two scores is not statistically significant or clinically significant. And I'm not sure if you noticed, this previously was red. So let's change that back to, let's make it a 112 again. Now it's both statistically and clinically
but Cindy, this is your cute little spreadsheet. Nobody has this.
Right. This is my cute little spreadsheet because I got tired of looking in 47 different tables to find the same data over and over again.
This is fantastic. So once again, you as parents know too, that if you had the money and ability to go outside of your school district and get tested, your clinician most likely would provide you with a GAI and the full scale IQ. Is that a true statement, Cindy?
Yeah, well, you could ask them to. Not all clinicians do that.
Really?
So let's be honest, and I hate to say this, there are clinicians out there that are inherently biased and they don't think it's relevant or important. They say it's not a full scale IQ, it doesn't matter. It varies by the perception of the clinician that you're talking to. So if you came to me, I would have already calculated the GAI, and if it wasn't significant, I wouldn't put it in the table, but I would tell the parents that.
But if
But
it
if
is
significant,
yeah,
automatically put it in because it changes how I perceive that child's potential.
Right.
And what then becomes an issue for them,
Right.
right? And how I can demonstrate underachievement and the severity of the underachievement.
And I will tell you, whether you have an average IQ or a high IQ, remediation and identifying this problem makes a huge difference.
Now, go ahead. What's
Well,
even more interesting is when you've got lower IQ scores,
yeah,
a couple of points makes an even larger difference.
wow.
So it's this bizarre thing. And if you don't know to ask for it, they're certainly not going to tell you because, let's be honest, not every school district is super excited about putting more students on the limited number of special education teachers caseload.
That's one thing that I didn't understand. Do you guys realize that special education are federal dollars that the school receives? And if the school has too many special education students, then the state has a tendency to audit them and look over them. So one of their main goals is to keep their special ed students at a particular level that doesn't cause warning bells to ring to the state.
Well, and so for example, Texas was recently audited because their numbers were so dramatically different than the rest of the states. So they only had 8% of students in special education services. And when we know that specific learning disabilities like dyslexia are anywhere between 7 to 20% of the population, which is a giant range, right? And we know that kids with SLDs make up the majority of the students in special education. Being down at 8% suggests they're not adequately identifying all of those students, right? And again, so here's the other thing I'm going to point out is school psychologists have a certain amount of training in administration and interpreting tests. Okay. They don't do the amount of training I necessarily got in the way that I got in identification of learning disabilities. They spend quite a bit of time, useful time, in counseling. How do we identify what's going on at home? How do we help a student move through issues in the classroom that are, home environment is affecting classroom performance? They can do that until the cows come home, and they're good at that. They've got extensive training on it. Most school psychologists, most, not all, don't have the depth and breadth of knowledge around academics. I took multiple courses in reading. What's typical development? What's atypical development? How do we expect reading to change over the years? How do we know what's working in reading, right? I have coursework just specifically in that of understanding what I expect to see in a progression. And our program focused very heavily, not just on what the numbers are, but why the number is and what errors a student had. And that takes an extensive additional amount of training that many school psychs don't have time to do in their program. And so you can go in and you can actually be more knowledgeable than the school psych, which you have experienced on more than one occasion.
Yeah, and one of the things I didn't understand, and most parents don't understand, it is not the job of the school psych, or they don't believe it's their job, to identify your very specific learning disabilities. Their job is to identify if your scores on academic tests or skills follow below that band that Cindy showed you. That is their job. They are just there to see, are you falling below your standard deviation away from your IQ? Because if you are, if you're below that, then we got to do something. If you're not, we don't.
Well, let's also talk about that for a minute. This is yet another meaty subject. It's not just about scores. So decisions about eligibility should not be based on one factor. So it should be based on classroom observation. It should be based on teacher input. It should be based on parent input. And it is complex and it's multifaceted, and parents often don't have the knowledge base that they need to go in and ask the right questions to better understand what the data means. They will get in, the school psych will throw up a bell curve and say, here are the numbers, this was qualified, this wasn't, so we're done.
That's it.
I've sat through many a meeting where it was just a discussion of scores, a little bit on the classroom, and they come back and say they're not qualified. They haven't demonstrated the need for specially designed instruction in the Gen Ed classroom. So yes, there's a discrepancy, but they're doing great. Their grades are good. No problem.
Yep.
Right? And they'll go, you know, the grades are good, so they're making adequate progress. And we won't even go into that because that's another can of worms to open up.
Yeah.
So knowledge is power.
Yes.
The more knowledge you have and the more questions you can ask, the more likely you are to get the information that you need.
Even just the fact that now you know general ability index versus full scale IQ, that in itself will make their heads turn.
Now,
when we go to this meeting.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because you and I went over a certain student's performance. Like, you got me a copy of the protocols, and I talked you through an element. Do you remember that? Where we talked about they missed early, easy items and then got way harder ones correct?
Yes.
And you said that to the school psych, and what did the school psych respond? Do you remember that?
Was this because they were tired or no, they
You said when you mentioned that to the school psych, Cindy said da 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 da. The school psych said, yes, I noticed that as well. Like, they had missed easy items and then gotten harder items correct. And the school psych said, yeah, I noticed that, and it was a head scratcher. Like, they didn't think about what that potentially meant. So
and what was the answer? Was the answer to that ADHD, or what was the answer to that?
Well, my working hypothesis for that was, hey, we need to go back and we need to look at attention deficit, but we also need to see if there were other things getting in the way. Was the student tired? Were there visual issues? Like, it's my normal, hey, we're going to check all the boxes and look at all sorts of different things before we make the determination as to what's affecting that child's performance.
So when something's weird, it is weird. And
it is weird. You should ask why it's weird.
You should say, why is it weird? And find out why.
And the trickiest part is finding the person that can answer the why it's weird.
But at least you have the knowledge to start digging. It is like anthropology. You really have to uncover. It is like detective work a lot.
So I think we've exceeded our quantity of minutes. So let's stop there now. And if you like this, leave us notes. If this generated more questions for you, leave us notes and we'll come back and we'll talk about it some more.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll see you another time.
Bye.